minutes.
Yeah, a little bit longer. All right, let's, we don't want to keep you guys here all night. We'll start doing some questions. Gentlemen here.
What file was in the projector, and can you tell us what projector we were looking at, and what was actually being projected in terms of what we were looking at?
Right.
Sure.
Eric,
So that's it's a 4K DCP, D65, P3. The projectors I've forgotten. I'm sure we'll have our team come down. But yeah, pretty standard. It's just standard DCI.
Cinema DCI, DCP sort of situation. We have it in a whole host of different flavors, delicious flavors. We've made an HDR version, full 1000-nit HDR version. We're also working still on a 300-nit HDR version specifically for the LED theater displays. We'll be able to look at that, Sony's specifically. And we have it also in SDR, we have it in HD and 4K, everything you can imagine.
Dolby Vision, cinema, everything you possibly want.
Yes, everything you could possibly want.
Okay.
I wanted to commend you on a tremendously monumental analytical undertaking.
Thank you.
My question is...
But. Hold on.
No but. Your summations at the end were non-committal.
That's right. That's how we keep getting another season.
Wait, hold on.
Okay.
Let's hear the rest. Go
I
ahead.
want to understand one thing. Instead of trying to prove something, you were disproving something. And you were just trying to show that the equity amongst the different models. Is that correct? I mean, was that by design, or is that by some political decision that was made at the end?
No, so I'll start a little bit. I'll let Steve take the politics part of it. The reality of it, I was at Camera Eric and I showing the world premiere of this thing, and a few DPs, like after the room emptied and we're at the bars and everybody's getting wasted, we're like, come on, just tell me the best one, right? And the reality is, and I swear to God, this is no allegiance to anyone, I don't have one favorite. I have a favorite for each scene, yes, but I don't have a favorite that I feel in this year won every scene. If you tell me my show is extremely low light and I need to be small and mobile, I have an answer for you. If you tell me my show is very skin tone based, I'm in studio, I can light it as much as I need to, I have another answer for you. If you tell me we're doing narrow spectrum lighting, a lot of sodium vapor in the street, I have another answer for you. And so I think the reason you feel like it's non-committal is because there isn't an answer of a winner, nor should there be. It really comes down to what show are you shooting, what are your requirements, what are your constraints. And if you tell me those constraints and those requirements, we can talk about what I think is the best camera for that environment. But I feel like, as much as the cameras have progressed and are amazingly good, none of them beat all of them.
No, I agree, and I would count film in that as well. That there's a time and place. I think that we approach this the same way that we approach our conversations with filmmakers. Initially, we'll sit down and we would like to have a very non-technical, very nebulous conversation about the visual language that they want their show to speak. Set up the rules that allow us to kind of formulate that language with them, and then back into the right technology. And this test is really meant to mirror that philosophy. We famously do not have a go, no-go camera requirements list. We make television shows that are full of pictures, not spreadsheets. And so we think it's really important to first establish what do we want the show to look like, taste like, feel like, whatever. And then Eric and his team will go to work getting exactly the right technology for that. And so we actually call this, we sort of refer to it internally as an image dictionary, because depending on the sentence you're trying to put together, you're going to need different words. We sort of think the same thing. Depending on the visual language your show is trying to speak, you're going to need sort of to make different pictures. And that's why the legacy of this decade worth of camera tests, I still think there's validity in the first year of tests. And they evolved, certainly over a decade, to be much more complicated and everything, but you can still look at images from the third season and you could still gain information from that. You know, there's still validity to it, and I think that's why, you know, we don't ever call it a shootout. We don't ever call it a, you know, we don't even actually call it a test. We call it a camera assessment series because it is. It's a, you know, it's a series of cameras, you know, being put under the, you know, close to identical scenarios as we can humanly make happen. And, you know, so we have this vast library now of images that we can draw from.
Yeah, and the library is there to not say, like Steven's saying, it's not the best, it's just to say, these are what it can do, and just so we can have that conversation, right? Because we have scenarios where a show will be shooting on a camera system, and, you know, they look at these tests and go, oh, for this scenario, actually this other camera system will benefit us somehow, right? And they will change to that camera system for that scenario, and then go back to the camera they've picked for everything else.
Well, may I just expand one more question?
Sure.
So am I to surmise from your answers that filmmaking is about budget and having multiple cameras on set so I can switch back and forth?
Not as much as it is. I mean, we here at His Majesty's Warner Brothers Discovery have shows from House of the Dragon all the way down to 90 Day Fiancé, right? So we cover such a massive spectrum of different types of media, different types of entertainment, and along with that, we have, different budgets, absolutely. I don't think you'd be surprised to know that 90 Day Fiancé does not cost as much as House of the Dragon, and so the access that they have to a particular tier of camera or of, you know, workflow and finishing or whatever, is going to not limit them, but is definitely going to inform what they use. The fact is that it's an embarrassment of riches these days. Everything, including your iPhone, makes a very compelling picture, maybe not as technically extreme as something that costs $100,000, but I think that's really more what we mean. And when we say, you know, a show is going to use maybe a very inexpensive camera as a crash camera, or is going to use, and that crash camera on a giant show might be the A camera on a smaller show, because, you know, the scale of their budget, a lot of times this is where the film conversation comes up. For most of our shows that shoot film now, 2, maybe 3 shows out of a cycle of about 150 HBO shows, the difference between shooting digital and shooting film is more or less a rounding error in their budget. So it doesn't really matter. You know, it's not a budgetary issue. Whereas if we were to look at a show, you know, like maybe even something on Magnolia where it's very high-end unscripted content, shooting film is 50% of their budget. So they're not going to do that. You know, they're rolling 2 hours a day and things like that. So I think that's more, you know, the thing to take away is of course, entertainment is always on a budget. You know, we don't have unlimited anything. But we have a pretty vast range, probably the most vast range of any company doing this sort of stuff.
And generally, I think a simpler way also of thinking about it is this. When I used to shoot film, I didn't carry just one stock. I had one set of lenses, I had a few camera bodies, but I had some 250D, I had some 500T, I had some 320, and depending on the scene, I swapped stocks. Well, today, why couldn't you do that with camera bodies? Where you have your A camera body, you have one set of lenses, it's all PL mount, let's say, but for my night exteriors, I'm gonna bring this body. And that's my stock for my night exteriors. But then all my day interiors are gonna be my A camera body. That's not a big budget thing, it's simply like, we're gonna shoot nights, I'll return this body, we're gonna shoot days, I want this body back. This is all the lens prep that happens ahead of time. So what you used to do instinctively with film, we're trying to say there's a big library of video that all feels slightly different. And all of it is perfect in one scenario. And so why not build your shootout with the best stocks for that particular environment? And I think that's hopefully what we're trying to impart.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Right there.
Thank you for the camera assessment. It was really interesting and very creative, by the way.
Thank you.
My question is around the, like, when you're scanning the film, if the film scanner technology has changed, or do you think it's going to change to actually, if you were to take the same stuff that you shot now and scan it again in the future, do you think you'd see something more? Or?
That's a super good question. So we had to come up with an extremely extremely specific process with our extremely good friends at PhotoCam to do the film scanning work that we did on this show. It was a density range specifically designed for the stock that we were shooting. It was bath temperature, all of this sort of stuff, and mostly for the available light, right, under nothing but moonlight. Film hates that. It hates it more than anything in the whole world. And PhotoChem went way far out of their way to give it the best possible chance of looking good. And Mark and the team there in the lab are, experts at this. They've been in some cases doing it for close to 30 years or more in some cases. And so they worked really, really hard to get it, first of all, developed perfectly, right? Then when it comes to scanning, I think that's a really interesting question because if, from the archival world, it's always been, well, you can always go back to the film, you're always going to get better out of the film. And I can tell you, as part of our team also does all the restoration work for HBO, working on The Sopranos right now, don't tell anybody that, by the way, I don't think that's public, but the process that we go through to scan is about as refined as we probably think manufacturers see a value in continuing. So, could we scan film better? I think we probably could. I mean, we're getting pretty close. At this point, more resolution is really pulling out, more of the film itself, of the substrate itself. But we could probably get it better. And I'm sure with, sharper lenses, all the kind of stuff we can do now, maybe it would get a little bit better. But the incentive for manufacturers to make the better film scanner are sort of the same as the incentives at the beginning of the motor car for the horse breeder to make a faster horse. Nobody wanted that once they saw the automobile, and I think this is a little bit of that where our desire to see a digital camera that has 20 stops of dynamic range or has whatever is a much higher priority if you ask the aggregate of filmmakers. A smaller camera, that's something we hear all the time. If we could get an Alexa 35 or something that was the size of a GoPro or a V-Raptor that was the size of a GoPro, I think everybody would want it, right? The size of the back cap for your lens. That's kind of, that's going to make our lives easier. It's going to make shows easier to make. It's going to make neater shots. It's going to be able to allow us to use perspective in a really cool way. So we put cameras in crazy places up on drones and all that sort of stuff. And so I think that's sort of the answer, is that the scanning is probably done. What we'll do though is that we will get better with manipulating those images after the scan. So we have very high bitrate images, we have extraordinarily huge file sizes, and now it's to tools, assisted AI tools, to do a better job of degraining, to do a better job of cleaning damage, to do a better job of pulling the most color fidelity. I think that's where we'll see the improvement, because that will favor both digital images and film images. It's just another sort of tool to that tool set. So yeah, I think we've probably seen peak film scanner, and I don't think we're going to see much more improvement on the hardware side, but I do see stuff happening on the software side.
Right here now.
One of the things I look for in my evaluations is how different sensors react to deficiencies in spectral power distribution for LEDs. So I was curious about your lighting selection for the skin tone segment, and things like, did you just go with presets, or did you do color mixing to do any smooth out of the curve on the SPD, or what was your approach?
So that's a great question. It comes up a lot. So this has been 10 years. Every year, one of my constraints for skin tones was filament lighting only. Black body radiators, mainly because of full spectrum color. And it felt very important to me that no matter what we did, we tungsten lit our skin tones. But this year, I started asking, I sat down with my gaffer, he knows a lot of other big show gaffers, he shoots a lot of big shows, and I was like, tell me what's on the truck right now. How many units do you have that are in the 5K and the 10K range? How much work is happening in skin tones on the tungsten side? And what I found out was, there's an HBO Green initiative, everybody's trying to conserve power, air conditioning, sound stages, and we're really moving away from burning lights. We just are. And so I found out that 60 to 70% of the people I was asking were working with the higher end LED units, the units with the best CRI, the units with the best advertised spectral response, and we know it's not 100%, they just can't make it yet, but they're getting close. And so based on that feedback, I intentionally decided that this is gonna be the year, since it's 10 years of CES, where we're gonna do our skin tones with LED. And so those are Vortex units. I tested them. They were as clean as I could get compared to the entire Liquid 5X or some of the other ones. I felt that they represented the peak in fidelity in LED lighting. So there's dome units on them. They're snooted and softened and that kind of stuff. And I felt that it is the right time to show skin tones with LED because most of the shows are doing it anyway. So it almost becomes counterproductive for me to show you a technique that the show itself is not going to end up using. So everything that you saw in the skin tones that is front lit is tungsten balanced at exactly 3200, then calibrated to the camera exactly at 3200, then white balanced individually on every single camera to be lined up at 32 with no offset. Now the back stuff is, as you saw, animated between yellow and blue, and that's designed to kind of show your eye and how it tends to trick you and add magenta when you get green in the background. And that's something I learned over the years as well, is I would see camera tests and to have a certain opinion and then see some of the show footage and be like, wow, in their entirely blue thing, I'm seeing a lot of yellow in their skin tones that I didn't see before, and I'm realizing it's simply color theory. My eye is tricking me. And so that's where the idea of saying, okay, we're gonna go tungsten, but I want this animated background so you can see it against two backgrounds and get a sense of how much your eye is filling in the blanks. But in answer to your question, this was a specific intent to, on the last one, actually go away from film and lighting towards LED.
Talk about how you look film? Lighting the 400.
Oh yeah, one of the questions that comes up a lot, I brought it up because I think there was a big war when we showed this in Poland, not specifically missile based, but more about the screening, and there was a missile that errantly almost hit us though, that's why I brought it up. And the question was film. The film is obviously very dark and available light, and will we fare to the film? And I just want to know, the entire test, every studio component was lit for film, meaning the base ISO is always set at 400. When I shoot film, I always overexpose it by a third to get a medium negative. So where the film underperforms, it's because the film is underperforming, not because we're not trying to make the film succeed as much as it can. So even, I'll tell you, dynamic range, for example, that's 20 stops at a base of a T4 at 400 ISO. So for those doing quick math, that's a triple digit T-stop to get to 10 over. It's extremely difficult to get that kind of range, that kind of brightness. You're talking about dark glasses on set, it is super duper bright. But we did it because that's the only way to treat the film fairly. If you're shooting Winning Time or you're shooting a show on film, naturally your lighting package and all of your setups are designed for that medium. So you would baby it, you would treat it well. And so we decided to do the same thing. Everything that was lit for 400, everything else got ND down and rated accordingly, except obviously available light, which was available light. So the moon was the moon, and you saw the film perform as best it could. That's a push 2 at Photochem. We did test between a push 1.5 and a push 2 to see if you were pushing so much noise at some point that there was a detail loss. And after reviewing with Mark and the team, they did a quick snip test. They were like, we think the push 2 is working slightly better than the 1.5. But that's everything the negative had to give. Those other hands up? Yes, back here.
Question, did you notice, can you expand on the choice on using your ZEISS glass over Panavision or the glass? And then, did you notice noticeable any color shift between when you were switching between glasses?
Great question. So choosing glass for CES is always difficult. Now, obviously, when we started and we were all Super 35 PL, we had a whole bunch of lenses available to us. The difficulty this year is you have film with its flange depth, right? You have Super 35 and you have full frame. So now we needed to find glass that could fit all three of them. Now, there's always that option, and it always comes up every time we have full frame versus Super 35. Do we put one set of glass on all the full frame, one set of glass on Super 35? It's kind of what you would do in real life. Is it fair? But my view is the glass is so subjective. It is so tainting of your view. If the skin tones are slightly more orange on that Cook lens, and you put a cooler lens on it, like a Canon Cineprime, which would be cooler than that, all of a sudden your feeling of warmth on the face would affect what you think is the camera. So we always, one rule of thumb of CAS from day one was the same glass goes on everything, no matter what. And that comes with, you know, sometimes a lot of downside. And so in this particular case, we were going to work between Ingenue, the Optimos, and working with ZEISS. We approached ZEISS early. The Supremes kind of started standing out because they cover everything, both in image circle and in flange depth. And when I tested them, I threw them up on a collimator. I felt the good part was they were pretty neutral. They're a little bit on the warm side, but not so much so that it becomes a characteristic of the image. The downside was they're very soft on the edges. The Supremes are made to fall off beautifully on the corners. They're made for skin tones, which for us is not so great in colors and patterns. Right? In colors and patterns, you hope to have a sharp lens with no softening at all, so that you can kind of show everybody, hey, be careful. If you put a sharp piece of glass on this camera, it's going to moray like crazy. Well, here we are on set. All of our BTS cameras are freaking out. You know, we have the FX3 or whatever, FX6.
Human beings on set are passing out.
Yeah, it's just waves, and you know. And I'm looking and I go, oh my God, they're going to get nauseous when we see this footage in post. And when we come into post, I'm like, I'm not seeing any of it. And I already suspected that might be an issue because when we projected, the center 5 inches were sharp, and it quickly fell off on the corners. Right? So I was worried, and I knew that this would happen, but then the question was, what do we do about it? The only alternative would have been, okay, we put master primes on these, and then we put, you know, Supremes on this one, Canon Cinis on this one, and now you're looking at a lens test. So the idea was, we're gonna learn something from this, is that the early test we shot, no matter what class we put on the Blackmagic, for example, it morayed like crazy. Well now, getting to 12K, just with a slightly softer lens, you can fix a lot of those moray issues. So that became the learning lesson for us, which is that it's fine if you're dealing with, you know, herringbone and paisleys and that kind of stuff. If your camera doesn't have an OLPF like our Blackmagic didn't, then go with softer glass if you want to compensate. Because you saw on our sharper BTS camera, sharp glass, sharp camera, you're screwed. So the lens is a very big decision, and so we landed with Supremes for that reason. It fit everything, it felt neutral, and we accepted this idea that it's just a little bit soft on the edges.
And I think it's fair to say that for some of our focal lengths, we had every one in existence. Like, we had to get them from Singapore, we had to get them everywhere. Everywhere there was one of these
Japan,
images,
Germany.
yeah. Everyone said
We actually stole half of them from
Yeah.
Cinegear. We literally went to the show floor and grabbed them off the shelf and then threw them on an airplane to send them to Australia.
Yeah.
Because you need so many, right? ZEISS is a great partner because you normally have, you know, a set. You saw some of our BTS shots. We're talking about 6 cameras, you know, 4 or 5 different sets. When you're flying a drone with 2 cameras at the same time, you then need both focal lengths at the same time. And then because the FOV changes on some of the cameras, you need that double set in 1 millimeter down. You know, it's a really complicated investment, and I think ZEISS didn't know what they were in for.
Yeah.
It was,
Well, our insurance also maybe didn't know.
Right.
We had a special policy just for lenses. The first time I've ever done that.
Yeah.
We had a $2 million policy just for lenses.
Yeah, it might be more
I
than
think
that.
we doubled the value of the airplane that flew those lenses to Australia for us. So, anyways.
It's right there. Yes, ma'am.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay, hi. Follow-up question to the initial question was, did you notice a significant color shift in between glass and
Oh.
change and then in between bodies?
No, actually, so they were really, really consistent. I was very worried about the sets and maybe potentially matching serial numbers of sets, but I will say this about ZEISS, this stuff is amazingly accurate. We tested 4 or 5 different sets when we were in it. I didn't test the sets that came from Singapore, they came too late, but I felt very confident just looking at the serial numbers that we had to test. They were very far from each other, and the tolerance was just incredible. And the reason I added the CZ2s, I was worried about zoom to prime issues, and I think a lot of that is old school. I think you think about old school zooms and how they fall off and they don't track, and you have 20 pieces of glass in there and you're not going to have coloration. And I was shocked at how well the CZ2s tracked the Supremes. We only ended up using them in a few circumstances where we needed a short zoom. We mostly worked with primes. But no, in terms of matching sets, it was remarkably accurate. I think, you know, when we went through 3D and all that eye matching stuff, a lot of people ironed out those situations where now I think the manufacturer's tolerances are so good that I felt very confident that we could, you know, mix and match sets and be okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, and on the body color piece, any coloration differences you see between the bodies are inherent in the sensor. And that's why it's so important to keep glass locked across the whole field. In years past, we've even had, our buddy Matt DeClo make us lens mounts specifically to be able to get a particular set of lenses on every camera. So that way, what you see, both color shift in available lighting, general color shift in things like skin tones, that's inherent in the sensor, or the color overflow of the camera.
Just go here and we'll come back there.
Hey, what did you do or not do in the color grade to keep it as a fair comparison?
That always comes up. It's a very good question. So essentially, in this year, ACES was a very big part of the functionality. There's two different types of grade handling in this particular program. One is the test that we feel should look pretty at the end. So skin tones, mixed color, lighting, that's meant to look like Rec 709 or DCI P3 finished work. But then we had other tests that I call evaluation work, like dynamic range and available light. The goal isn't to give you a beautifully graded Rec 709 or P3. The goal is to show you, is there any more information in this image? I don't want you to come up to me and say, available light, if I took off the LUT, was there more detail there? Or in dynamic range, if I didn't make it as contrasty, was there more highlight or shadow? There was none. So essentially the way we do that, the way we accomplish is what you don't see on day one is we shoot a whole bunch of charts. We built this giant tent village, and each compartment in the tent gets its own chart. And there are a combination of available charts like Chroma du Monde and Billups and stuff like that, and a few that we customized over the years. And the goal of those charts is to allow us to build custom transforms that we feel are as objective as possible. So what that means is we always use ACES for the color transform, because that's theoretically what the manufacturer is saying our zero line basis is. If you take their IDT, that's them approving the transform from raw to your destination space. But then when it comes to gamma, I'm not really happy with ACES 709. I feel like it's very contrasty, it has a very push in the high gamma area, so it looks too punchy in my view. And because it's so punchy, it hides a bit of information that I think the audience should know about. So the shows, like for example, skin tones and mixed color lighting, have very close to an ACES gamma and gamut transform, with a slight offset just in white point and midtone. But tests like available light and dynamic range, what I do is I use those charts to baseline mid-grade. Every camera has a different log point, and I set all of those at 50%, and I lock one stop over, one stop under, and I take the brightest point, bring it down to 95, and take the darkest point, it goes up to 2%. So when you look at those images in available light and dynamic range, they feel a little bit low con, and they feel a little bit desacked. And it's because the contrast has been withheld and the sat has been withheld in that transform, and the goal is really, it's a one-lot transform. Every test you see, we don't do any click-to-click grading, no powered windows, no secondaries, nothing. That's how it was lit. And then one master transform per test, skin tones, everything. And so the goal is, if I turned off available light and you saw the log, and I turned the LUT back on, you would see no more detail. No more in the highlights, no more in the shadows. It just gets a little bit more contrasty, a little bit better looking, a little bit more saturated. But if I turned it off, you'd gain nothing. Same thing in dynamic range. If you don't see it on that wall at 10 over, I can turn off the LUT, you're still not seeing it in log. So those two, I call them preservation grades. They're slightly better than seeing it in log, but still not a full presentation format, versus the other skin tone and mixed color are presentation grades. They're meant to look punchy and saturated, but most of those are using an ACES pipeline.
All right, I think we have one more question. We have time for one more. That answered your question. There's a gentleman behind you. So
in terms of testing for this sort of 500T film, we have the Venice with dual native ISOs, the X35 that does like a rapid exposure for high sensitivity. What was deemed appropriate in terms of having the baseline, obviously 500T film can't change their versions of cameras that have a best capability scenario like in.
That's a great question. So the most of the tests that are studio-based have a studio-based ISO. So what we do is we meet with all the manufacturers ahead of time, and I literally ask them, I'm like, okay, so if I'm doing studio work, what do you think is the best over and under protection at what ISO? So it turns out that 800 ISO is the nominal ISO for most of those cameras except film, which is 5, which is why I did for 4. So that essentially you're 1 over for everybody else that gets an ND filter, so they get to work at 800 with an ND, so that's where they're segmented the best. The only exception is available light. So in the case of available light, as you mentioned, some cameras have different modes for capturing the best they can. So in the case of the Sony Venice 2, we shot it at 3200 ISO native, because that's what you would do if that's the only camera you have to shoot that shot. In the case of the Alexa 35, the enhanced sensitivity mode had not been a menu yet, but they actually sent us a body, and the body was hard-coded in enhanced sensitivity mode. So every camera that had a better setting for that, it was set at that. But you know, in the case of most of the cameras we had, you know, like Red, for example, is raw. It doesn't really matter what you set it at. So we set it, you know, at 2000 ISO, but it didn't really matter because it's all metadata on Red. So every camera was set to either 4 in case of film or 800 as a base for everybody else for all the lit tests except available light, which we did very well.
Yeah, we couldn't get the dual native ISO working on the film.
No. Trying to load both 550D
At the same time.
jamming the gate.
Maybe that's what happened with that one. We did get a film jam on the film drone, which was a super fun experience. Yeah. To have the camera shredding your film when it's up in the air.
One more thing?
We do one more.
Alright, so there's somebody here who actually was ahead of that person. I think this is in the middle? No? Did I
You
skip?
said we answered this
Was it
question.
right there? Go ahead.
This is not a technical question.
That's okay,
It's the best way to end. Yeah.
But I'm sure I'm not the only one here wondering.
His jacket. Is it his jacket?
What was the overall budget that you spent?
That's funny, that's the perfect way to end. We get that every time, and I'll tell you, it's a lot less than you probably think it was, but we don't make that number public.
No, but I think it's fair. It's fair to say how this thing comes to light, because if you come tomorrow to our workshop, we're actually going to show you 2011, 2012, all the way to here. And 2012 started in a warehouse in Vernon behind a sausage factory. And if you know Vernon, California, it is a place where the executives refused to come visit the set. So it was okay for us to be there, but it wasn't safe enough
Too
for
dangerous
them
for
to
the
be there.
C-suite.
So-
And no, literally, a sausage from Farmer John's, which is the manufacturer of the Dodger dog, it was the next building over.
Yeah.
So
I just want to say real quick,
Come a long
because
way.
the question comes a lot, and I'll say this. One of the things, the only reason this is even made is because we poach, right? We go, who has stage space that they're not using, even for a day? Okay, well, they're still building that, they're gonna try, okay, we'll go shoot that scene in your stage, and we'll borrow grips, we'll borrow lumber, we'll literally poach from stuff. So this thing started in Vernon, near a sausage factory, and as it gained in popularity, more people on shows were kind enough to say, listen, we're down this week, do you guys need this? And we'd be like, yes to everything. Yes, we'll take it, we'll figure out how to write a scene based on this puppet that you guys built and are not gonna use, right? So I think that when you ask that question, it's a fair question, because people go, well, I'm not gonna shoot that. We just did a demo in Paris and the guys were like, I can't build that, it's crazy, so we get it. But the idea, the way we look at it goes abstract from the presentation. This is HBO, we have to make a presentation. Think about just the pure concepts behind the test. When I prep them, I literally make little doll houses in my studio. I find the science first, and I make sure the science works. And I'm doing it with paper cutouts and cardboard, and my light meter, and I'm like, okay, this works. Now let's build a giant apartment building that we're gonna slice in half, right, on a 100-foot stage. But that doesn't have to be that. That's for the presentation. The science behind it worked on my desk, in a paper cutout. So the idea really, and we're gonna talk about tomorrow, making your own camera test, that's literally why we're doing this workshop, is everything we've learned and how you can distill it to a show that you're shooting. It's coming up, you only have 2 days of prep, you're not gonna do this. It's very obvious. But you can learn from this how to do the 2 or 3 things that you might not have thought of to then gain control of your tool so that you feel confident once you go in. And I firmly believe that if you abstract from the bigness and the imposition of it, you'll find that the core science is replicatable very easily.
So, and I guess just one other thing, not going to sound as elegant. I'm sorry to, but we actually have a show that watched this latest version. It made a change for some of their scenes that allowed them to actually gain an hour in production. So regardless of how much this cost, we saved that production a tremendous amount of money because they were able to.
It's a couple $1 million for us to be able to shoot an extra hour over the course of 6 months or something. So yeah, I think that's it, right? I mean, yes, it's, as you can imagine, it is not inexpensive, but it's an investment that that Warner Brothers and HBO make because it's something we hope that our filmmakers get something out of. It's something that Sonny and I share with our students, and we hope evangelize to them in such a way that all they want to do is work for HBO or Warner Brothers, because we want to capture the very best talent on the planet. That's how we're able to make the shows that we make, not because we spend the most money, but because we think we have the very best people working for us. And this is a part of, I think, giving back to this community, the filmmaking community at large, but also giving our filmmakers an opportunity to get a very inside track. Any of our filmmakers are welcome to sit with Eric and look specifically at the hours and hours and hours of footage that go behind this that we don't show in the presentation, because this needs to be from producer to DP and everybody in between, at least informational, if maybe not entertaining. But if you are a DP working for us, your whole team is welcome to come and watch this as often as you'd like at either Warner Brothers or HBO or at least in the UK. And that's it. One more?
Well, we're just got one guy.
Okay,
but not another budget.
Quick. No, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm curious, which one was your favorite for available light?
Oh, no, that's good. It's fair. I don't really have a favorite for available light. I think it's an incredibly tight race between the Red V Raptor and the LX35. I think that the Red V Raptor is amazing in super low light, but it doesn't necessarily work as well in overexposures.
I think even Red was very shocked at how well they performed on that test, and it's the one that comes up the most. It was a shock to everybody, and I think the biggest thing to me was how they maintained color imagery all the way down into the blacks. And when you're grading it, you look at the scope, and there's no excursion in the shadow, which means the noise floor is a single pixel line. It's remarkable. I think it suffers in other areas, but certainly for that, I think Eric was alluding. I think I was alluding that that's certainly one of those things. If I had to go shoot a shot like that, and even if my show was an Alexa show, I'm packing another stock for that night. I'm gonna put a V-Raptor in my bag and going, for that scene, that's what we're doing. And you only know that by testing. If you had told me 3 months before the shoot, is that, I think you're gonna want to, I'm like, no, why would I? And then you do the test and objectively have to look at it. And it doesn't matter if you're a Red fan or not a Red fan, you have to be objective. And I think that's the thing. And when we were in Poland, so many people came up to Eric and I and said, I gave up on Red 5 years ago because I had problems with my Epic or my Dragon. I have to go back and look at this thing, right? And that's alone something interesting to us. You gave up on a certain tech, rightfully or wrong, but now you have a storytelling tool in your kit that you might not have gone for. And if we've awoken just that you're going to go tomorrow on the show floor and say, hey, turn on that Raptor, I just want to look at it, that's already a success, I think, for what we've done.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.